Hey, it's me. Before we get into the episode, I just wanted to mention something. I'm trying something new. This is really very experimental, so if you don't like it, sorry. But basically, what I'm doing is for the video version of this podcast, I'm actually putting on a nice, warm, cozy fireplace. So if you don't usually watch the video version of the podcast or just listen to it on audio, go check it out on YouTube. It's also I think the video also gets uploaded to Spotify as well as Patreon, so patrons get the video of the podcast, and it'll be the little introduction, but then we'll get right into a nice warm cozy fire as you listen to the story. So again, it's experimental. If you don't like it, no worries. We'll be playing with some other video options here soon. I don't know, I've heard people talk about video being the native language of the internet, so I figured I'd try it out and just see if it's something that enhances the experience for you guys. So hopefully you like it, and I'd love to hear from you either way. If you like it or don't like it, I'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch. And now, without further ado, me. And we're back. Thank you guys for tuning in to Another World Audiobooks. I have got to give a special shout out to a listener, Bethany. Thank you so much for the kind email and all your kind words there. She said she just started listening to the podcast and was kind of bouncing around between Sherlock Holmes and Treasure Island, Pride and Prejudice, but then she got into Meet the Tiger and was hooked. So we're glad to hear that. Loving the Saint's sense of humor and the British slang as well. So thanks, Bethany, for your very kind email there. I replied to you, and if you have a free audiobook that you would like from the Another World Audiobooks library, just let me know. I'd be happy to send that over to you. Again, thank you for the kind email. It really does make my day hearing from listeners. It's just very encouraging, and especially an email like Bethany's. So thank you, Bethany, for that. Definitely did make my day. And yeah, I'm so glad to hear that people are enjoying the podcast, enjoying the audiobook that I selected here. So yeah, if you want to sign up as a patron, just wanted to note that if you do want to sign up as a patron, you do get episodes early, which is a really cool bonus. So I'm trying to get these out as quickly as possible. And I think a week or two ago, patrons to the podcast actually got, I think, 3 episodes in 1 week, which is pretty legit. So not a bad thing at all. If you want to sign up to be a patron, it's a great way to support the podcast. And I want to be able to bring you longer episodes, more episodes, do potentially extra books at the same time as we're doing another book, kind of have a Wednesday, Sunday release schedule or something like that. But in order to do that, I need your help. So if you want to sign up and be a patron, that's a great way to support the podcast. If you want to just support the podcast by spreading the word, that's another great way to get the word out there and allow me to continue to do this for you for free. So thanks, guys, for listening. And without further ado, let's jump into the next episode of Meet the Tiger. Chapter 10. The Old House. It was Oris, that stern disciplinarian, who ruthlessly interrupted the séance in order to lay the table for lunch. That was half an hour later, though Simon and Pat would both have sworn that the interlude had lasted no more than a short half-minute. The Saint moved away to an embrasure and gazed out at the rippling blue sea, self-conscious for the first time in his life. The girl began to tidy her hair. But Oris, after one disapproving glance round, brazenly continued with his task, as though no amount of objections to his intrusion could stop him enforcing punctuality. "Lunch in half a minute," warned Oris, and returned to the kitchen. The Saint continued to admire the horizon with mixed feelings. He was sufficiently hardened in his lawless career to appreciate the practical disadvantages of romance, with a big R, horning in at that stage of the proceedings. Why in the name of Noah couldn't the love and kisses have waited their turn and popped up at the conventional time, when the ungodly had been duly routed and the scene was all set for a fade-out on the inevitable embrace? But they hadn't, and there it was. The Saint was ready to sing and curse simultaneously. That the too marvelous Patricia should be in love with him was all but too good to be true, but the fact that she was, and that he knew it, quadrupled his responsibility and his anxieties. It was not until Oris had served lunch and departed again that they could speak naturally, and by then a difficult obstacle of shyness had grown up between them to impose a fresh restraint. "So, you see," remarked Patricia at last, "you can't leave me out of it now." "If you cared anything about my feelings," returned the Saint somewhat brusquely, "you'd respect them and give way." She shook her head. "In anything else in the world," she said, "but not in this." So that was that. Simon had used up all his arguments, and further effort to combat her resolution would only be tedious. She won. Short of an appeal to brute strength, he hadn't a thing left to do except grin and bear it, and do his best to make the going as safe as ingenuity could. And like many strong men, the saint shrank from applying caveman measures. At that moment, he would even have considered throwing up the sponge, tipping the wink to Khan, and sliding out of the picture. What stopped him from taking that desperate way out was a shrewd understanding of the girl's character. Somehow, out of a normal education and a simple life in a forgotten country village, she had acquired the standards of a qualified adventuress, in the clean sense, and she had a ramrod will to back her up. She felt that it was only the game to stand by her man in any and every kind of trouble, and she meant to play the game according to her lights. She would only despise him if he refused to carry on her account. She was determined to prove to him by deeds as well as words that she wasn't a clinging vine who was going to cramp his style either before or after the wedding bells, and it was quite hopeless for the saint to try and point out to her that she would only hamper him. As hopeless as it would have been ungracious, bearing in mind the uniqueness of a girl of her caliber. But for one thing, Simon could and did thank his stars. He had successfully put her off the track of the first string of his bow, the discussed inn behind the village. He would be able to tackle the proposition from that angle without her knowledge before nightfall, and if the fates played into his hands, he might manage to get a stranglehold on the tiger before it was her turn to bat. "If the mountain won't budge, Mahomet'll have to leave it where it is," said the saint disarmingly. "But there are 1 or 2 knots that ought to be untied in the course of the afternoon, and that's where you can help. 1, it might be a sound plot to see if we can't get this Aunt Aggie palaver cleared up a bit." "She wouldn't tell me anything last night." "You were hardly on form then, with me loose in the menagerie. This afternoon you can go back full of beans, with a parting hug from me to pep you up, and lamb into Auntie two-fisted. If you can only carry it, you've got her cold. After all, she admits having tapped your treasure chest to save herself. It isn't too stiff a return to ask her to get a bit off her own chest for your satisfaction. I know she's a hefty handful, but she isn't half the size of some of the things you'll have to wire into during the next 24 hours, and it'll limber you up. If she tries to bully you, remember that there isn't a bully swaggering the earth that can't be bullied himself by someone with the guts to take on the job. And if she finds she can't treat you high-handed and bursts into tears, don't let him dissolve you. I can't take her on myself, so I've got to rely on you." She nodded. "If you say so, Saint, I shan't mess it up." "Good scout," he approved. "The other item is old Lapping. He's been lying doggo since the beginning of the piece, but there are so darn few possible winning numbers in this lottery that I think we ought to get a line on Lapping. On the face of it, he's right out of the running, but then so's everyone else in Bakem, and I'm just wondering about a lad called Harry the Duke." "Harry the Duke?" she repeated, mystified. "Whoever's he?" "A swell mobsman that Lapping sent down for 7 years when he was a judge. It was a nasty piece of work. I'll spare you the details, but Harry escaped 6 years ago, and he never was a forgiving man from all accounts. In fact, knowing what's said about Harry at the yard, I'm surprised he hasn't taken it out of Lapping before now. There's a story that Harry followed the first magistrate who convicted him halfway around the world, and got him. Since when there was no other, Harry being miles and miles above the common run of crooks and brains, until Lapping. It's a long shot, I know, but bad men run pretty much to pattern, and the tiger's acknowledged to be an Englishman, and the hunch got me recently. Supposing Harry the Duke is the tiger." "Wouldn't he have been recognized?" "Harry's face is pure plasticine, and he's forgotten more about makeup than most actors ever learn. And Harry's one of the few men I'd credit with brains enough to wear the tiger's hat. It's all speculation, and long odds against it on probability, but it's worth a flutter. You see, if the tiger did happen to be Harry the Duke, and the tiger started operations not so long after Harry broke goal, it accounts for Lapping's continued health. The tiger'll just be waiting till he's ready to skedaddle with the swag, since Lapping's right where he can lay his hands on him any time, and then he'll pay off the old score and sail away. She was still puzzled.
"But what do you want me to do?"
she asked. "If you've got time and energy left after pasting Auntie, go over and be sweet and winsome to Sir Mike," replied Simon. "You know him quite well. Lay it on with a spade. Ask him to advise you about me. That's sound. If he happened to be in with the tiger, it might put you on safer ground. If you can kid them, you're not in my confidence after all. If he's harmless, it can't hurt us. Talk to him as the old friend and honorary uncle. Tell him about l'affaire Bittle, noting how he reacts, and lead from that to my eccentric self. You might say that you felt attracted, and wondered if it was wise to let it go any further. The blushing ingenious maiden act."
"I'll do it,"
she said, and he leaned across the table and touched her hand. "You're a partner in a million, old Pat." After lunch, Oris served coffee outside, and they sat and smoked while they discussed the final arrangements. "I'll send Oris over to fetch you after dinner," he said. "I think it'd be better if I didn't appear. Put a bathing costume on under your frock, and when the time comes, I'll give you a belt and the neatest waterproof holster that'll carry your fitting guns. But I'll give you the shooter now." He took a little automatic from his pocket, slipped the jacket to bring a cartridge into the chamber, and clicked over the safety catch. "And it's not for ornament," he added. "If the occasion calls for it, let fly, and apologize to the body. Have you ever handled this sort of gadget?"
"Often. I used to go and shoot in revolver ranges on piers."
"Then that's all to the good. Put it away in your pocket, but don't flourish it about unnecessarily, because it belongs to Bloom. I picked his pocket when I was showing him out last night, thinking it might be handy to have around the house." She rose.
"I'd better be getting along," she said. "I shall have a lot to do this afternoon, and we assemble after dinner."
8ish, he said. "Don't take any risks till then." "I just hate having to let you out of my sight even for as long as that. You never know what tigers are up to. All the help I can give you is distrust everybody and everything. Keep your head and use it, and don't go and walk into the first trap that's set for you like any fool heroine in a novel." Her arms went round his neck, and he held her close to him for a while, and then she drew back her head and looked up at him with a smile, though her eyes were brimming.
"Oh, I'm silly," she said.
"But love's like that, old boy.
What about me letting you out of my sight for so long?"
"I'm safer than the Bank of England," he reassured her. "The gypsy told me I'd die in my bed at the ripe old age of 99. And do you think I'm going to let the tiger or anyone else book me to Kingdom Come when I've got you waiting for me here? I am not." And then there had to be a further delay, which need not be reported, for those who have lost their hearts know all about these things, and those who haven't don't deserve to be told. But at last he had to let her go, so he kissed her again, and then took her hand and kissed that, and afterwards he took her shoulders and squared them up and drew himself up in front of her. "Soldiers' wives, Pat," he commanded. "Cheerio, and the best of luck."
"Cheerio, Saint," she answered. "God bless you."
She flung him a brave smile and turned and walked off down the hill, with Oris ambling behind like a faithful dog. Just before the path led her round a bend and out of sight, she stopped and waved her handkerchief, and the saint waved back. Then she was gone, and he wondered if he would ever see her again. He went back into the pillbox, took off his coat, rolled up his left sleeve, and strapped Anna securely to his forearm. That was for emergencies. But now that the tiger knew all about Anna, the saint had to rummage in his bag for her twin sister, and this dangerous woman he fixed to his left calf in a similar manner, where it would be quite likely to be overlooked if he were caught and searched. He made sure that he had his first aid cigarette case in his hip pocket, and, as an afterthought, he added to the kit a telescopic rod of the finest steel with a claw at one end. As a final precaution, he sat down and scribbled a note. "If I don't turn up by 7:30, look for me at the old house, the place behind the village that used to be an inn. Failing that, try blooms or bittles. Don't go to Caen till you've drawn blank at all those 3 places. And be careful. If they get me, they'll be on the lookout for you." This he folded, addressed to Oris, and left in a conspicuous position in the kitchen, where his man would be sure to find it when he returned. Then the saint went swinging down the track towards the village. It was a ticklish job he was embarking on. In broad daylight, stealth was out of the question. It would mean walking boldly up to the enemy fortress and trying to get as far as he wanted in one dash, before the opposition could collect their wits. And then there would be ructions. But that would have to take care of itself. The saint did not remember the old house very distinctly, and he paused at the edge of a spinney lower down the hill to survey the land. And then he gave thanks once again for the continuance of his phenomenal luck. There it was, the blessing out of the blue that he'd never dared to hope or pray for. A long, low wall that sprang from one corner of the old house and ran north towards the straggly outskirts of the village, losing itself behind a couple of sheds belonging to a small farm. Hardly believing his good fortune, the saint hurried down the slope and passed through the village. He worked round the farm outbuildings and found that he was not deceived. The wall started there, and it was just high enough to screen his advance if he bent almost double. That was not a very difficult feat, and Simon plunged straight on into his adventure. Stooping down, he trotted rapidly along under cover of the wall till he had nearly reached the nearest corner of the old house. At that point he slowed up and proceeded with more caution, travelling on his toes and fingertips in case there should be a watcher posted at an upper window. When he actually came to the old house itself, he flattened down on his stomach and lay prone for a moment while he planned his entrance. He could see one wall of the old house, a dead, flat facade of chipped and mouldering brick, broken only by 4 symmetrically placed windows and doors. The door was a godsend. The windows themselves were roughly boarded up, and to prise off those boards, though it could be done with a brace of shakes, would be rather too audible for the saint's taste, whereas a mere door could probably be dealt with, by an expert, almost noiselessly. The saint wormed his way forwards, fitting himself as snugly as he could into the angle between the wall and the ground, and taking infinite pains to make no sound that might betray his approach to a keen ear within. From the moment he left the shelter of the wall, however, he was in danger of discovery, for if any sentinel had elected to peer out of a window, the saint would be lucky to be overlooked. The watcher would probably scrutinize the nearest cover, in which case his gaze would pass right above the saint. But, on the other hand, the enemy might well be aware of the possibilities of that too convenient wall, and in that case anyone who was taking a peek round would certainly cast an eye downwards, and then the saint wouldn't have an earthly. That salutary realization made him wriggle along as fast as he could with safety, and it must be admitted that his spine was tingling and the short hairs on the scruff of his neck bristling throughout the dozen yards crawl. It is not pleasant to have visions of a man sticking a gun out of an upper window and plugging a chug of lead down into your back. But his head came on a level with the door at last, and nothing so disastrous had happened. The saint crept up into a squatting position and tentatively began to breathe again while he inspected the door at close quarters. He found that the handle had snapped off short. In fact, he discovered the tarnished brass ball lying under a bush a few yards away. The lock was rusty, and the door sagged on its hinges. The saint scratched his head. Either the old house was not the goods at all, or the tiger cubs were banking a lot on its reputation of being haunted. He looked again, and more closely, at the broken end of the handle lever protruding from the door, and caught his breath. The jagged metal was shining. Not a trace of the rust that flaked over the rest of the metal dulled its brilliance. That was a new break. Even in 48 hours the exposed steel would have lost some of that sheen. Therefore, someone had been there recently. And unless the village children were less superstitious than their elders, that meant that the tiger cubs had graced the premises. Simon put his hand on the door and pushed gently. It gave back smoothly at his touch. The saint took his hand away as if the wood had burned it. The door yielded smoothly. It wasn't locked, or bolted, or barred, and there wasn't a creak anywhere. And the doors of houses that haven't been inhabited since the year ... don't do things like that. For one thing, the hinges are so rusted up that it takes a thundering good push to shift them. But these hinges turned like brand new ones, freshly oiled. That meant that someone certainly was using the old house. And, plus the fact that there was apparently nothing to stop anyone else using it as well, the complete scenery had a howling warning scrawled all over it. A tight little smile moved the saint's mouth. "Will you walk into my parlour?" said the spider to the fly, murmured the saint. "Surest thing you know, son, but not exactly like that sort of fool." He drew back to think it over, and cast a thoughtful glance at the boarded windows. But the same difficulty presented itself. To break away a plank makes a noise at the best of times, and he could now see that the planks in question were not simply nailed to the frame, but solidly riveted in place. That seemed to rule out the windows, which left only the door, with someone waiting for him inside, as likely as not. Well, Simon decided, that had got to be faced, and it was better to tackle something you had a line on than something you hadn't. It wasn't a time for humming and hawing, and eventually leaving your card and promising to look them up next walk you took that way. He was more than ever determined to get inside the old house that afternoon, and the door was the only way in that presented itself. Therefore, it must be the door. The saint pushed the door a little further. Nothing happened. Then he slowly edged one eye round at a point where no one within would expect a man to appear, only a few inches off the ground. But inside was darkness, and he could distinguish nothing. The saint swung the door again, until it was over a foot ajar. Plop! Just the noise that a big stone makes falling into a well. And something nicked the door, breaking a burst of splinters out of the rotten wood. The saint looked up at the wound, and saw that it would have been on a level with his chest if he had been standing up. That was enough. Ultimatum, declaration of war, and attack all together. And it meant also that, whatever was waiting for him inside, it would probably be healthier to charge right in and take it on than to stick around in the open where half a dozen tiger cubs could take potshots at him from the windows. The saint gathered himself for the rush and slid Anna out of her sheath. He tested his muscles, drew a deep breath, and jumped. One leap took him well inside the door, and in a flash he had banged it shut again behind him. That evened things up a bit, for it stopped him being a target against the light outside for any sniper hidden in the darkness. Then, almost in the same movement, he had flung back again against the door in a corner. He had half expected to find someone waiting just behind the door to put him down as he passed, but his groping fingers touched nothing but dust. First mistake. Well, that meant that anything that was coming to him would arrive out of the blackness in front. The saint stood motionless, listening intently and straining his eyes to try and locate the gentleman who had fired that single shot, and had been too surprised at the suddenness of the saint's reaction to loose off another round at that critical instant when the saint was silhouetted in the doorway on his way in. It was at least a comfort to have your back to a wall, and to know that the other man was literally as much in the dark as you were. But there were such things as electric torches, and the saint was tensely prepared for a beam of light to shoot from the obscurity and pick him out for the benefit of the man with the gun. Simon had Anna held in his deft fingers, ready to send her whistling through the hand of any man who turned a spotlight on him, and equally ready to hamstring anyone who might creep up and jump on him. Minutes passed without the other side making a move, and Simon shifted one hand to scratch his head mechanically. Not even his preternaturally acute hearing could catch the least sound. And in that silence he would have bet half his worldly goods on being able to detect the faint rustle of cloth if a man so much as lifted his arm. He made out the steady beating of his own heart, and even heard the whisper of his wristwatch ticking, but there was nothing else. His eyes were gradually becoming accustomed to the gloom, and at last he began to scowl very thoughtfully, for the passage in front of him was empty. One by one the details became visible. First, 2 doors, opposite each other and about 2 yards away, both of them closed. He looked down. The dust lay thick on the floor of the passage, and there were marks of many feet, both entering and leaving. Some of the footprints branched off to the door on his right, but it seemed that nobody had used the room on the left, unless there was another entrance to it. At the far end of the passage was a small window, boarded up like the rest, and it was through this that enough light filtered in for him to be able to see. It was not long before other features of the landscape showed up. Further along, to the left, was another door, and the footprints proved that that room had been used fairly recently, and at the end of the passage, under the window, stood a table with a square box on it. The saint looked long and hard at that box, and suddenly he had an inspiration. Bending down, he felt along the ground by the door. Presently he found wires, and a little research disclosed the fact that they ran up the corridor, towards the table and the square box. A little more investigation brought him to the metal contacts which closed the electric circuit. One of them he found screwed to the inside of the door, low down, and the other projected from a terminal fixed to the floor. On the strength of that, Simon began to tiptoe down the passage, though he did not relax his vigilance for an instant. He came to the table and the box, and examined them with interest. The wires he had found led to terminals on the box, and from the front of it protruded a shining steel tube. "Very ingenious, my tiger," was the saint's unspoken comment. "When I open the door, I get pipped, and I didn't after all. So sorry." However, just in case the arrangement had any more shots left, and in case he should have to leave hurriedly by the door, he slewed the box round so that the gun barrel pointed into the wall, and disconnected the wires. Then he took stock of the position again. The discovery and circumnavigation of that little booby trap didn't dispose of the possibility of encountering others. In fact, his estimate of the tiger forced him to realize that the next step he took might set some other equally neat little contrivance working. And if not that, there might still be tiger cubs in the building, already warned of his arrival by booby trap number 1 going off, and knowing that it hadn't functioned quite according to plan. The amusing thought that they might be in some fear of his fighting record struck the saint, and he chuckled quietly. Perhaps they felt confident of having him safely trapped, and were just biding their time to strike him down when the operation could be performed without risk to themselves. Well, it wouldn't hurt them to keep on hoping. But the job looked just as prickly now that he was inside the old house as it had been when he was outside. However gingerly he opened the next door, there might be men inside the room, waiting to open fire as soon as he showed up in the doorway. Yet the saint was no piker, and having got so far, he intended to go the rest of the journey, and the only course he could see was to repeat the tactics he had used when entering the building in the first place. So, without further hesitation, he got on with it. There was the door with footprints leading to and from it, and that seemed the most promising. There were also footprints outside the swing door nearest to him, but these were less encouraging, for at that point there was only a double set, whereas the others seemed to have been fairly popular. And the saint's philosophy laid down the law that if you must stroll into the home sweet home of a bunch of cutthroats, you might as well do the thing in style. Wherefore the saint went down the passage and halted by the most dangerous-looking door. There was a handle on that door. He turned it and opened a couple of inches. Then, keeping well away, he set his toe against the wood, braced himself, and kicked. The door opened wide, but there was no muffled report. That short history, at least, wasn't going to repeat itself, and accordingly, the only thing to do was to march straight in. Simon went, in a cat-like spring that carried him round the corner, and set his back against the wall again in a flash. But once more there was no response. Simon had jerked the door shut behind him as before, and one foot was against it, so that nobody could open it and sneak out without his knowing it. But only stillness answered his listening, and the room was so dark that he could see nothing. He cursed himself for not having an electric torch. But it was far too late to remedy that, and therefore his only hope was to strike a match, and hope that his concerted speed of eye and brain and hand would be great enough to overcome the handicap he would have to create for himself. If there was anyone in the room, he would be able to see the saint before the saint saw him. But the saint had taken longer chances than that, and his nerves were getting just a shade raw. Simon Templar was afraid of nothing that he could see and hit back at, but this creeping around, seeing no sign of the enemy, and yet continually threatened by him, was turning into a joke that the saint didn't feel inclined to laugh at. Still gripping Anna, he fished a box of matches out of his pocket, and struck one quickly, holding it behind his head so that the flare of it would not dazzle him. And the room was perfectly empty. The match burned down between his fingers and went out. He struck another, but even that could not cause a human being to materialize. Yet there had been men there. Their footprints were all over the floor, and there were 3 comparatively new-looking beer bottles in one corner, and scraps of greasy paper were littered about. "This is getting annoying," said the saint. He struck a third match and took a couple of steps into the room. Then he tried to hurl himself back, but he was a fraction of a second late. The ground dropped away beneath his feet, and he felt himself falling down and down into utter darkness. All right. Man, falling down a trapdoor. Didn't see that one coming. Poor guy. All right, we'll be getting back to Simon here and making sure he's still alive in the next chapter. Pretty sure he will be, but we'll see. So tune in for that. I did have a few words in our vocabulary corner here at the end of the podcast. Spinney is a small grove or a copse. That was a new one for me, so if you want to go into the small woods, you can say you're going into the spinney. It's a S-P-I-N-N-E-Y. That's a new one. And then plasticine is a modeling material made from calcium salts, petroleum jelly, and aliphatic acids. So it kind of looks like Play-Doh type stuff, I guess. I don't know if you've ever used plasticine. I would love to hear from you. And then the last one is palaver, which means idle chatter. So it's a talk intended to charm or beguile, a negotiation or discussion concerning matters in dispute, especially in traditional cultures of West Africa. Palaver, that's a good one. So if people are not talking about serious things, why don't you just stop all this palaver? And they would look at you confused because they wouldn't know what you were talking about. But you could just smile because you know a word that they don't. All right, thanks guys again for listening and for supporting the show. If you enjoyed this podcast, I am asking you, pleading with you to tell other people about the podcast. Podcasts are very hard to market, very hard to grow. At least that's been my experience. I don't know, other people don't seem to have as much trouble as I do. That could just be me. But anyway, regardless of that, I'm having difficulty getting the word out about the podcast, so I need your help. Tell other people that you know about the podcast. Spread the word. It's a free audiobook, so what's not to love and what's not to share there. So I try to make it as easy as possible to share things. If you go to anotherworldaudiobooks.com, all the links for social media, all the links for the books we've done, the first episode link for all of the books we've done is also on there. You can go on YouTube and search Another World Audiobooks podcast. We are all over the place, and just click share, spread it out on your social media, make some TikTok tweets about it or whatever, and get the word out there. So thanks guys for listening, and we will catch you next week.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Selling your car shouldn't feel like a second job. It should feel easy. With Carvana, it is. Just visit Carvana.com, enter your license plate or VIN, answer a few quick questions, and get an offer in minutes. Like what you see? We'll pick it up right from your door and hand you your check. No haggling, no hassle, no problem. Car selling made easy on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.